Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming out tonight. The rain cooperated and stopped just a few minutes before we had our meeting tonight. So, how many of you have been involved in this Buckwood situation for the last 10 years? Yeah.
10 years?
20 years, you're right, 20 years.
19.
Right. So you know what has been going on this property and the situation that we've been in on that property since 2000. Since that time, we've also been involved in litigation on the property, and there are some things that are still involved in litigation with this developer, so there may be some things that I'm not going to be able to answer questions on if it pertains to any of that litigation. However, what we are going to be talking about tonight is one of the court-mandated issues that we have to address. So were actually three parts of the litigation, three separate different litigations with this particular development. The third of which has to do with affordable housing, and that is what got us to this zoning overlay that the courts required from us. So about 2 or 3 years ago, some of you were probably at a similar community meeting where we presented to everyone the proposal that the developer had at that time. I know, Jim, you were there. Was anybody else at that presentation? Susie? And I think you guys might have been there. So at that time, the developer was proposing 144 apartments on the property, and we talked about his proposal. We gave our input. When I say us, I mean the community and the council, and worked out some possibilities with that 144 apartment units. The good news that I have today is that after courts, we were able to get the number of units down to 75. So it's almost half of what the developer originally wanted to put on the property. And the courts have mandated that there has to be some development with a maximum of 75 units on that property. The courts also told us that by May 30th, they wanted to see from us overlay zoning on the property that would show what we were planning on doing or allowing to happen on that property. What you're going to be looking at today is that overlay zoning that the planner has worked on for us. I want to tell you that, by the way, that's Jim and Chris. They are the borough planners. What they did was a lot of research on the amount of coverage, is that a good way of putting it? They looked into all the recent developments in Highland Park that were approved and tried to get a comparable amount of open space and coverage for this development. Is that a good way of putting it?
It's one of the, yes.
Okay. And they will talk more, you're going to talk more about the research you did, correct?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. So you'll hear more about the research that got us to this particular overlay zoning. We need to keep the discussions today to what you're seeing in this overlay zoning so that we can focus and take your input before things are finalized. So at this point, I'd like to turn the room over to Jim and Chris, and thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Gale. Good evening. Just for us to try to understand
the group a little bit. Who here is from the South 5th neighborhood? Okay. And how about the South 7th neighborhood? And others from further away, or is everybody's home basically shown on this aerial photo somewhere?
Pretty much, yeah.
Immediate neighborhood. Okay, just want to have an understanding. So as the mayor indicated, we have before you an ordinance that's been introduced, referred to the planning board for review this Thursday for a reduced number from what was originally proposed of 75 housing units, including affordable housing on the site. We've tried to use, and we'll explain a little bit more, a more environmentally sensitive approach. And by that I mean there are approaches that you could take where you could, and there were plans that we saw that had been prepared previously that placed townhomes or single-family homes or multi-family apartments across the entirety of the site, from one side to the other, one end to the other. We tried to create a more compact footprint, so that we only had to have development on a smaller portion of the site. You have to accommodate something. You have to be able to meet the court mandate on the 75 units. And we've also included provisions regarding buffering, screening, landscaping, and tree replacement. And I know it's sad to see the trees that have been lost out there. So I think you all know the site and its access from South 6th, Mansfield. These are just a couple of aerial views around it, and unfortunately views that are now historic in terms of what was there. One of the things that's important that sort of drove and informed the thinking about how to try to place development on the site is that the site obviously is a ravine that's water is flowing down to the meadows and the river, through in this direction here. And the lower portion where it connects to the upper meadows has been recognized in the master plan and some of the other planning documents for years in the Highland Park is connected to it by proximity, by natural systems, by critter paths, all of that. So we basically attempted to take an approach to have the development in a smaller portion closer to where there is existing development. So that's closer to Mansfield, South 6th, where there's access, South 7th, and 5th at those ends of the streets. So it wasn't an arbitrary decision. It actually is, to some degree, really based on trying to preserve the connection here in the more environmentally sensitive southern end of the site. And that was something that the borough had put out in dialogue about this site for years. And so that area and the coverage and what's allowed within its setbacks basically becomes this portion of the site. So it's, about half the site. It's at one end, with the attempt being to try to have more preservation at the far end. And just showing our representations of where development can occur. These are envelopes, not buildings, and then we did some preliminary analysis. There were plans that we were shown that were proposed by the landowner that basically, as I said, had development that was configured in a much more expansive way across the site. And so what we tried to do was pull it back, tighten it, and to try to do something where we could place parking under buildings and stack up in a way that we would have less disturbance. At that time, I guess we were hoping for overall less tree loss. There's obviously been tree loss that is sort of a separate issue apart from what this ordinance, and so the idea was try to preserve towards that end of the site, try to have minimum buffers. It would be great if they could be more than they are, but we can't accommodate the required development. So we're sort of stuck with some real challenges in terms of how do you work the development envelope, access in some parking that will have to be on surface, either both on street, and we tried to minimize the parking lots and then place parking underneath multifamily buildings, which allows for a minimum of 30% of the site with a large focus at that end of the site as open space. That was the logic, and that was the environmental rationale, and also the policies that are in the master plan related to shaping the envelope to that point. And this concept plan, which you see an earlier iteration on the boards over there and on the handouts. And by the way, does anybody, there's a couple of extra copies of the ordinance. Maybe Chris, you could pass these out to the audience. So maybe, again, just to orient everyone, Mansfield, South 6, so there is an access point here.
Thank you. Sorry.
What we're showing here is that there could be a turnaround that acts as both a gateway in, a transition to the neighborhood, and doesn't force somebody who comes in by mistake to have to go all the way to the end and come back. We're showing 2 buildings flanking a street that, according to the state standards, can have on-street parking, which is just like the streets in your neighborhood. And I think part of this, even though you might, in a perfect world, not want to see anything happen on the site, we think it's important from a town planning standpoint to try to continue the same sort of street with on-street parking, shade trees along the street, sidewalks. It's that connective fabric and tissue that we use to tie things together. And to some degree, we also thought about the fact that this site has been an informal route that people have taken over generations down towards the upper meadows and the river. And so the sidewalks along the street also become part of that pedestrian connectivity. And that was also, again, part of the thinking here is that at this end of the site, there's some continuity with the trail system that's there. So before we get to those diagrams, I'm going to step back for a second. Chris, do you want to talk at all about any of these aspects of the ordinance?
Sure. So, anyone had the chance to really digest the bulk regulation, the setbacks, requirements, distances? So you've seen 330 feet, stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is try to explain graphically what that means. So as Jim was talking about, we're trying to keep the compact development really towards the northern end of the site, that's this side, the left side of the screen. And in order to do that, what we did is in just pure numbers, very clean, 300 feet from the southern edge. That's what's driving that edge of the site, to try to make it look like it's half the site is only being developed. When you apply the 30-foot setbacks to the 7th and 5th Avenue lots and a 10-foot setback on the north side, that resulting building envelope is where you could build. That represents almost 40% of the site, but our ordinance only says 25%. And I'll describe a little bit later why I chose 25%. When we apply the minimum building separation between the buildings on this tract, 68 feet, the result is building footprints which appear like bars. So that's what's driving the requirement that there's 2 buildings, generally within the yellow/orange area. So the plan that we have is a representation of what could be built. And we believe the setbacks are heading that direction. And obviously later on, we'll try to get some feedback if it's heading in the right direction. So 200-foot setback requirement for parking areas. Track buffer, as Jim mentioned, and open space requirement of minimum 30%. So I'm going to go back to the building coverage of 25%. And if you notice, the footprint that's left over is actually 27.6%, so a little older, but the maximum requirement is 25%. So when we had first provided that number as an acceptable number, it was asked by the court master, where'd you get the number from? And he gives a study. So I was asked to do a study all recent projects in Highland Park. And what I did a report, 25 pages long, but I looked at the Maryville project, overlooked the crossings, the Pulte project, the American Properties Heritage, as well as some downtown projects along Meriden Avenue, including 31 River Road. So what I found was that there was a range of building coverage, basically the building footprint and impervious coverage, is basically anything that's man-made, parking areas and buildings. So for a really large site, like Marywold is a 16-acre site. In comparison, this is only 4 acres. So Marywold is 4 times the size of this, and it's about 200 units. That's about 12 units per acre and 12 apartments per acre. This site needs about 18 change. Marywold, in comparison, is 12. So this is more densely populated than the Marywold project. In fact, it's more densely populated, would have to be by quarter than Marywold, Overlook, Crossings, Heritage. All those projects are recently built, except for the downtown areas, which are small lots. Now, generally in planning, we try to have development in a downtown area, like Meriden Avenue. That is where it makes sense to have 20, 30, 40 units per acre. And that's a really small site, and that's where you should see building coverage, say, 70, 80%. And then impervious coverage of 90, almost the entire lot. But those are lots when you're downtown. Almost the entire site is covered with something, which is not uncommon these days. When you look at areas that are more in fringe, like Marywold, along with Leland Avenue, and this site, if you get to larger areas, larger tracts of land, that requires a smaller footprint for development. So when I average out all the developments, and use the crossings as one example, this is the Pulte project on the corner of River and Cleveland. And for comparison, they're looking at all townhouses and single family. The townhouse portion is only covering 20% of the site. That is a 10-acre site. This is a smaller site. You got to use more density here. And that site only has 9 units per acre. We have to do double that. So that made us come to the conclusion that townhouses are not appropriate for this site if you're looking for twice the density that was approved for Pulte. So that's why we had to look at these multi-family units with parking underneath. If you didn't have parking underneath, you would be looking at the entire site being used for surface parking. So that's why we had to use the model of having a building on top of parking. That way you can get about 2/3 of your parking underneath the building. You won't see it. You can have a compact development. This model is not atypical in Highland Park. Marywold does it, and the landowner had proposed at least 2 iterations of plans that did have these types of buildings, which is the building over parking. We refer to it as podium parking, but it's essentially, again, a building over your parking. I know there's a question that was asked at the council meeting. Was it Monday? Tuesday? Last week. The question was, who would build units over parking? Well, it's not uncommon. And in this site, it's actually necessary to do so in order to get the density that's required by the board. So this is the plan that we looked at. I'm going to move on to a section. So I'm going to go back a slide. So what I did was I took a section through right around this we'll call it the entrance to the site. Well, this is not going to be designed this way, but it's a representation of what could be built.
Excuse me, Chris. Does everybody hear Chris? Can you use the mic?
So what we did here was we did a section view of what
I
this
don't think
might
it's enough.
look like.
It's not working.
Is it on?
It says on.
It's not.
Hello?
I can hear you fine, but I don't come here. First floor.
Fuck that, Chris.
Yeah, just try to talk about it.
A lot of noise over here.
Yeah.
So what we tried to do is show a representation of what this might look like in the section view, basically a cross section through the site. That way the neighbors on South 7th and South 5th can get an idea of what we're looking at. There's a pretty substantial grade change at this portion. On South 70, that little flat area land is usually mostly ranch homes, one-story ranch homes. They're sitting at about 80 foot.
Yeah, why don't we just orient everybody so they can understand this drawing. It's a technical drawing, it's called a site section, so it's basically, it's a cut line you're seeing through here that basically shows landform and building. So this is South Fifth, the street is here. These homes on South Fifth, there's one that's representing it, it's typical. On this side, there is South Seventh, the street is noted right there, and there's a typical home just as a marker. And this is a person in the backyard, the back of that home. The property line is here, their front property line is there, so this represents, again, a typical, some houses are closer to the street, some are closer to the rear. The same thing on South Fifth. There's the front property line of the street, there is the rear, and there is a human scale as referenced behind the 2.5-story home, the 1.5-story home.
Are you taking questions now?
So this is a cut line right through here. So we can take questions as we go, yes.
How accurate is the height-wise, the elevation change between the street and the development, proposed development?
This is based on existing topography that was provided. The existing, if there was nothing here, basically comes to a low point in the center and then rises back up. So that's what the existing ground form is doing.
This is at the entrance, is that what the
It's
Right
at
here.
this point right here.
And you're showing a height of, is that 48 feet?
Of the building?
Yes.
The building would be the maximum of 48 feet from the top of the podium, which is the parking area. The parking area is
That's
Right.
4 stories.
built. It'll be 4 stories in the sense of living areas, but the top story would be housed in a group so that you can have dormers. But it is 4 stories in terms of elevator access, but the appearance needs to look like a 3.5-story building.
So the parking isn't actually underground, it's
It's on the ground level of the building, but to place parking under the building, they basically need to do some excavation to place it down there. But again, that reduces the footprint of development across the site.
How high above?
But it does result in taller structure.
Really, I mean, it's really, we're really talking about 5 stories here, not 3.5. My
It's
impression.
If you, yeah, you took the half story
levels,
as a
if
full
you want to
story.
count the levels, but it's considered 3.5 stories under the zoning in the
So
building.
how high above the curb at South 7th and South 5th do you estimate these buildings to be?
So the curb is up here on South Fifth, so I'm just going to follow that line. It sits around this level here, so that's, I don't want to say
4
2
stories.
stories up, it's,
So we're saying it's 40 feet above the curb? So you got 8-foot ceilings,
10.
5 foot of floor.
10 feet for the first floor, 9 feet for the second. up.
So
9 feet with 4 floors.
38,
Yeah, close to 40.
so it is, in that height.
And on the other side, on South 7th, since there's a steeper drop in the back, the building will appear slightly lower, so maybe instead of 40, it's 35 feet above the curb line.
So in a straight human eye view, our hope is if you have a fence or the requirement we have for 6 foot tall at time of planting, we want to modify the ordinance to include evergreens, that there's something that is helping to shield at this level from backyards so that you're seeing less of the building versus the whole expanse. I know when you look at this view, technical view, it looks, and if you didn't have a fence or there was no screening at the edge, you would see more of it. So that's why we have buffering and screening requirements.
Of course, the people on the top floor will be able to look back down into our backyards.
Yes.
What are we doing in terms of sound barriers? because that area is completely wooded, and all of the mature trees that have been growing there for decades are now gone. And 2 buildings with 75 units, potentially 75 cars, make a lot of noise. So what is the proposal to keep sound, to minimize the sound of traffic to the residents on South 5th and South 7th Avenue?
Right, and traffic, where in particular? So,
Traffic in and out of the building, you have people that, I mean, this looks like a very walkable building where you expect residents to
Right.
spend time outdoors. There's a population density there that doesn't exist anywhere else. So there's noise that emits from that, and what is being done to minimize that noise?
right, so let's go through traffic movements, which create some of the noise that you just said you were concerned about. So from South 6th, I imagine that this red dot is a car coming in, and we'd like to push for something that sort of slows traffic, so it's moving slower. It's, number one, it's more quiet. Those cars would come in, and many of them would park under the building. So the ignition on and off, turning cars on, closing car doors would all be contained under the building. So that acts as a dampening device and helps to mitigate noise. There's some surface parking back here. There are other approaches if we didn't limit the coverage where there could be exposed parking lots throughout the entirety, and in many cases cars parked closer to homes. So we try to, similar to the mass being contained and placed in a limited area, to some degree that's also true with where the cars are. So
Where are the entrances to the garages that are under the buildings?
So you have to come down the extension of South 6th to the lower side of the site. The topography's dropping, and you would come in under the building here, and on this side, under the building here, and then there's parking. Did we have that in one of the earlier?
Yeah, go back about 4 or 5 seconds.
Yeah, there you can see. So here you can see these very light lines that represent the parking spaces that sit under the building on each side. So it's basically, it's a
It's a garage.
wall, it's a garage.
It's a
wall
large garage under each building.
Jim, I think there's some new greenery on the perimeter as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, yes.
No, just as if that, I don't know, would that also act as a...
Oh, it would. I mean, and there is a great difference, but I tell you, it's a science, and so I don't want to predict being low, whether that's less or more, because sometimes that can magnify it. But those are concerns that certainly we want to be aware of once a developer proposes anything, so we can try to do what we can to further address noise.
And what about noise during construction? Because this isn't going to happen overnight. This is a long, drawn-out process, and construction takes a long time. So while this is happening, anyone who's trying to sell their home on that block is going to have a problem.
Don't.
Yes, sir.
I say, I'm just wondering, you're saying 75 units. Is there going to be enough room for 150 cars? Because, parking is a premium in this town.
Yes.
I fight with the teachers all the time for a parking space, and I live here.
So what governs residential parking in the state of New Jersey is what's known as the RSIS, the Residential Site Improvement Standards. That sets the parking for the 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartments, and the ordinances call for complying with that. You can't ask for more. So that basically averages about 2 spaces per
unit.
So that should be ample parking, given that these aren't single-family homes where you tend to have more cars and more.
And then you also said about parking on the streets, too.
And there's parking on the streets that's part of that. Right. Part of that.
I think we should get resident parking permits, to be honest with you.
Yes.
I have a question. I may have missed this. I was a little late and I apologize. So if you've already explained this, I apologize for asking this question.
Could you please speak up, because I know this is noisy for me and I don't know if it is for others.
I'm curious, you keep mentioning this ordinance that's requiring the population density to be 75 units. What ordinance is that, and why is the population density so high?
That's an ordinance that we discussed earlier, has been introduced by council and the mayor in a
So
introductory remarks
basically,
explained it.
it's court mandated density for the property. So as I explained earlier, there were 3 separate pieces of litigation involving this particular developer. The third litigation involved affordable housing units, and the courts have mandated that the borough allow for 75 units on that piece of property, of which there are different percentages that have to be different types of affordable housing.
So is this rental units or are these condominiums?
So, what we are doing is a zoning ordinance that will change the zoning in that area. It's called an overlay zoning that will allow for residential. The developer can decide if it's going to, or come to us and say they're going to be looking at rentals or they're doing condos.
So my follow-up question to this is, if Highland Park has an obligation to provide affordable housing, there are many sites in the last 10 years that have been developed with luxury housing. Why is it that this particular spot?
Every single development is required in Highland Park, has been and is required to have either, if it's for sale units, it's 10% of the properties have to be affordable. And if it's rental units, I'm sorry? 20%. I'm sorry, she's right. It's 20% for rental units.
If it's, right?
If it's rentals, 15%, if it's for sale condos, it's 20%.
Okay, thank you for that correction.
So is this entire unit affordable housing?
So say it
Is
again?
this entire unit?
No. If it's rentals, it's going to be 15% affordable, and if it's for sale units, it will have 20% affordable.
And remainder
We actually have affordable housing requirements on every single property that gets built in Highland Park. So even those luxury units have the same percentage requirements.
Mayor, could you just talk about what the original proposal was, how many units they actually wanted to?
So for folks who came in later, as I was explaining in the beginning, originally, a few years ago, we had an open public meeting like this with people who were living in the neighborhood because the developer came and wanted to put 144 units, apartments, on the property, and it's spread out throughout the entire piece of property. We were able to, in the court, get that number down to 75, which is almost half. And just so you know, I don't know how long you've been living in the neighborhood.
My mother has been in the same house on South 7th Avenue for 55 years.
Okay, so
I grew up in that house, she grew up in that house.
That's great.
And unceremoniously, with no explanation to her, the woods that she once played in as a child were completely demolished with no explanation.
We only heard about it happening, I think half an hour before the guy did it. The courts did not get back to, we didn't hear the final verdict of the judge till at 4:15, 4:30. By 5 o'clock, he was out there cutting down the trees.
I wanted to add one other point of clarification to a question that came earlier. Under normal zoning in New Jersey, you're not allowed to discriminate between rental or for sale. It's not possible under the Fair Housing Act. You can only do that with a redevelopment plan that might specify it. So, yes, I know, Jim, you were waiting.
Can I get back to the height issue? Because the way you have it, the way I read it, 3.5 stories over a parking podium seems kind of vague. Isn't there a way to make it like a maximum height over curb level of the surrounding area? Because if he starts at the podium parking on ground zero, we're talking 5, really, in reality, 5 stories looming over the neighborhood. When you say 3.5, it really was 4. So, wouldn't it be better to clarify exactly how high he can loom over us?
Is that possible, Jim?
If your goal was to try to reduce the height of this, then what would happen is we're going to have to start to put more buildings on the site.
Well, can't he actually have to go down by putting the podium parking underneath here? Because what I'm saying is it's actually the first floor is parking.
Yeah, what you're seeing here in this section view is partially underground, and this is dashed line by hard to see, but you follow this line, this portion, this building, for example, is almost entirely, the parking is almost entirely under existing grade.
Chris, this is the existing grade.
At this point.
Grade at this point, it goes down and back up. The dashed line. So we are actually doing that. There's some limits in terms of how far they can go and still achieve the transition grading in this direction.
The idea was to get the parking level, there, basically the bottom floor of the car's parking lot, around to where it meets grade here. These two.
Because the slope changes as you move further south.
Yes.
It drops.
Yes.
Quite a bit.
Right, so that's, again, what we said before, you're coming into the buildings from the low side.
Go back to the section. So this section cut was taken at this point. If you were to move this down here, this line would be higher up.
And wouldn't
So
it be
you need
even
more.
further up, more south you go? Or is that the
It would appear to be
maximum?
more
No.
further up out of the ground because if you get to the end of the building, this building will appear to be at grade, but the height will still be the same, so we're not stepping the building. This is a change in the grade. But yes, there is a grade change. I would say at the end of the building, go back to the point. At this point, you're about 10 feet lower than this point.
Is Jack Morris going to have to accept this, or is he simply going to go back to court and ask for more?
I'm not going to speculate on,
Does he have to take it, or?
This is the zoning that we're proposing the planning board approve for this property. Once it's approved by the planning board, this becomes what we take to the courts, which we're required to have to them by May 30th. And this becomes part of the legal settlement. So, I don't know, how he'll react.
Essentially, this is our offer.
Well, it's not our offer. It is, we're making this the zoning requirement for that piece of property.
Question about zoning. When you're making zoning requirements, can you require that homes be made for purchase instead of for rent?
No.
no, I
Can't make that
answered that earlier.
requirement.
No. It's not allowed under the Fair Housing Act.
Okay.
Discriminatory.
And just to come to the zoning board, this was always zoned for development.
Okay.
You don't have an elevation drawing of the actual, if you did a slice through the center of the drive-in and had an elevation, then you would actually be able to see what you keep talking about, trying to explain the garage entrance, the driveway, because the level, the grade of the whole property changes. So that's vertically in. I'm talking about doing an elevation where you could actually see the entire grade as it changes on the property and showing the housing on that grade change. That would be very helpful. You don't have that?
We have it drawn out by hand, but it could be something I compare for those.
There's a question in the back.
And there will be a grade change, as we discussed, along the street, so that does change as we move along the building.
I'm just saying it would be easier for people to
Visualize it.
Yes, because yesterday I took a walk on the property. I walked from the park and I cut through from 7th to where the cutting was, and it's a huge slope down. And as it slopes down and I walk over to South 6, it rises, but on the back side of it, it slopes all the way down. I was trying to see if I can find my picture that I took yesterday.
So that's a very good question. So maybe we can try to describe also what we're showing. By the way, we're showing what's possible under the zoning. This is not a proposed plan. So the zoning is really a formula. So
This is
there,
the architecture.
no. This is not in the ordinance. This is, we're trying to help you visualize what the ordinance allows. So to place the building down below the existing grade, there's the existing grade line. This is showing a retaining wall here that then sort of tables the land that allows that to be placed a little bit lower. We have another second version. See what happens, these buildings still within the allowable area, that retaining wall might also become part of the building wall, which has its pros and its cons to it. Cost-wise, it's often less. Disturbance-wise, it's hard to say. There's different trade-offs, and that's really up to the applicant, the owner, with their site engineering. But this is what we're showing within the setback if they were to push the building all the way to the edge and place it there, in which case it may also mean that the parking is less visible at that lowest level.
But again, I think it's important for everyone to understand, this is not what it's actually going to be. This is what, if you take the ordinance, could or could not happen on the site.
So are there proposals for other ordinances and not just multifamily homes? What would it look like with single-family homes?
Because we're required to have 75 units, where this is what you're basically going to be able to fit.
So 75 units is a maximum, right?
Correct.
But it could be
It
less.
could be less. Can it be less?
Yeah,
That's a maximum.
It's,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's being
yeah,
presented
sure.
as the maximum is 75.
If the lots were the same,
Maybe
looking at
75, why
40
can't it be
houses.
less?
If you hit conforming single family? I think it would be more about 28, so you need 5,000 square foot lots.
We saw other, let me try to go back and address that issue. In trying to devise this, and I fully understand and realize that there are elements of this that some folks in the room looking at and saying, you know, why are the buildings near me? There may be other folks that are at this end that don't. We saw layouts for this site that had homes or townhomes pulled behind the entire length of the site and mass grading and everything completely cleared. And you would probably also have very sharp retaining walls right behind everyone's lot.
When people come to us on the zoning board and they have steep slopes like going down to the river, riparian zones, we don't let them build on it. You know, there's setbacks. Why is it different here?
Well, we are trying to push development away from the river in that direction.
But to answer your question specifically, this was done through the courts with an LSRP, and the LSRP has the final say, and the judge has the final say. And the judge said, this is what you're allowed to do there.
Is there any decision about impervious surface? What percentage of impervious surface is allowed? What percentage of impervious surface is allowed?
Surface
In this zone, proposed
green.
go back to max of 55%.
That's
Which is consistent with what you propose.
Which is in the ordinance, what you're proposing.
which is in the.
And what you see in the plan is more or less about 49
So essentially, when this judge went from 28 homes 75 units. He created a lot of wealth
He
for
didn't
Jack
go from
Morris.
28 homes, he went from 144 units down to
Well,
75.
that's what he proposed, but how did that fit into, wasn't it zoned the same as the surrounding neighborhood? That was my sense.
It's zoned residential.
It's zone RA.
It's the RA
Essentially,
zone.
everything.
Yeah, the residential has lots of different, you know, you could be apartments, you could be townhomes, you could be single-family homes. That's what residential is.
Wasn't it those single-family residential? That part of land, when I bought a house over there, when you check in the town hall, I mean, it was part of like single-family plots.
A number of years ago. A number of years ago, I think in 1999, was zoned and then the zoning was changed.
Before our time, I don't know.
Okay, so.
So why can't it be changed back?
No, I feel like we don't have control because it's in the courts. And the judge has told us what has to happen on that property. And he has said 75 units.
But
Max.
I think, yeah, go ahead. I want to be fair to the folks in the back.
That's okay. I mean, I like, it's not related to that. I've been involved in that for a long time.
Right.
And I don't have clarity about this 75. It says max, okay? And that partly, if I understand, come from Mount Laurel, you know, the judge court. So, in principle, we could have provided, you know, some of those affordable housing. I know I'm bringing, but the density from what I hear is unprecedented almost, isn't it? It's
No,
like
isn't it
twice.
comparable?
No, we have public housing.
I mean, I think we are creating here, you know, 6th Avenue won't be able to maintain so much
So
traffic.
let me just clarify the one thing you said. The density is not unprecedented for the area. If you look at 6th Avenue, we have our affordable housing there, we have our senior housing there. The density is also based on the density that is from new developments in other places of town.
That's really not a fair comparison, I apologize, but the senior community doesn't have the same car traffic that would. The affordable housing that's on 6th Avenue, that's like 24 duplexes. It's not the same thing.
Okay, so the place where the driving studies are going to be recommended is at the planning board meeting, which, by the way, the planning board meeting is on Thursday night, and it is an open session. So and I think, Jim, you're at the planning board, or Chris? Okay. So the role of the planning board is to advise the municipality on proper planning for different developments, etc. So it is possible, you know, that the planning board is going to ask for a driving study, and that would have to be conducted.
At what point does this developer have to come up with a plan, since you had to do it first? Since you did all the pre-planning, what are the requirements?
We're under an obligation to put the zoning in place.
And he's under no obligation.
No.
So once he comes up with a plan, there's no public discussion for that, it's just whatever he decides, as long as it fits within the parameters?
No, they would prepare a plan, file it with the municipality. Hopefully there would be interaction before then, where we could communicate concerns of the neighbors and try to affect this. You know, but in a strict legal sense, what the, I'm not an attorney, but what the requirements are is they just can file plans that conform to the zoning, and it begins a review process. First for completeness, and then to the planning board, and in the process, both our office, the borough planner, and the borough engineer, and possibly some of the other boards and commissions might review the application. And there would be, at the very least, at the planning board, those neighbors within 200 feet of the site would receive legal notice letting them know that an application is coming in. I think what Well, my recommendation to borough would be, we try with the applicant is to, try to have some degree of neighborhood meetings and interaction going in, but the law doesn't require that. We strongly suggest it.
So for instance, on most of the recent developments that we've had pop up all over town, we have had meetings, several meetings with the people who live in that area, with our planner, and we've invited the owners of the property to come hear what the neighbors are saying. And neighbors were able to give us input on the kinds of, us and the developer, input on the kind of style they want to see the houses or the apartments be, and that input allowed us to produce a redevelopment plan that we then give to the developer and say, this is what it has to accomplish.
But in this case, the developer is not under an obligation to do that. We had.
And I just wanted to add, your neighborhood is not the only neighborhood. We have American Properties on Cleveland Avenue. Right now, I live on Cleveland Avenue. I've lived there for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
We lost all the woods behind us first, the crossing. Now that we've got a clear cut and the one remaining tree, the one gorgeous, huge pin oak tree that was supposed to be saved, was now, all the roots have been severed on one side. So now we've been told that tree is coming down as well. We have county, we're going to have 300 more cars going back and forth on Cleveland Avenue and North 2nd. And there's a school coming in at the end of the road.
Well, we don't know that yet.
I'm not even going to go there. But you're not the only people that are going through this kind of.
And that also, that development.
That's supposed to make us feel better.
That development also, waiting for us in municipal government, that development was also forced down our throats by the courts.
Jim, how many units are in the senior housing buildings?
242 has 100.
The more recent one?
There's two of them right there.
I know this has
One's
56.
the county and one's in town.
This is 56, I'm not sure about this.
That's 100.
Yes. I know you had a question.
I just want to get a little bit of clarification about the 75. So
Could
as far
you
as,
speak a little louder?
just trying to get a little clarification about the 75 as a number. So the court orders 75 as a minimum, as a maximum? I know that it's coming
So
down from the
it's
144.
a two-pronged kind of number. So they said it's a maximum of 75 units, but you must get a certain number of COA units out of it. So based on the formula for COA units,
You need, okay, so you need 10 to 15 units, and
Right.
therefore you
Right.
need, because if he goes with rental, then
correct,
you have to have 75 in order to get that minimum of 10, right?
correct.
Okay.
So 75 is not a real maximum.
Say it again?
75 is not a real maximum in the sense that the court obligates a certain number of affordable units. It doesn't obligate the ratio, it's a minimum
No,
ratio.
the borough has
The borough.
the borough has a requirement for
Because that's what he's
affordable.
going to put.
Yeah.
I just have a question, if this goes through, and at what point do we meet our affordable housing number?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
If this goes through, do we meet all of our
If
affordable
this
housing
goes
number?
through, we're done.
So there's no more development that would require affordable housing?
No. Because of the borough's stand on supplying affordable housing for residents, any new building that goes up in the borough would have to have the 15 and the 20% set aside so people of all means could live in town.
That's multiple.
Yeah,
So
multifamily.
this particular development would fulfill our needs for the town?
For the first, this will finish our first round of affordable housing obligations. Yes. Okay. So the affordable housing issue is an issue that every municipality in the state faces. And we are at, right now, the end of our first round of affordable housing. The state will then address, going forward, how many units each municipality in the state of New Jersey is going to be required to have. So they may say, okay, Highland Park, in the next 10 years, we want you to have 25 new, I'm just throwing a number out, 25 new affordable family units and 65 new affordable one-bedrooms.
So does that require that we build proportionally new buildings?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay, this is my question. Can we take existing buildings in town and convert them to affordable
Already
housing?
done. All existing buildings in town have a certain number of affordable house units in it.
So if I move out of town, can you take my house and convert it to affordable housing?
If you sell it to us. If a private person buys it, then it's a different situation.
But infill development, redevelopment downtown could increase the density.
Absolutely. And anything that would go downtown. You've heard me talk a million times about our economic future is based on downtown development. So downtown, where there should be ensity, we can put more affordable units. So that's why one of our #1 goals is to complete some new downtown development.
Do all the existing, like, garden apartments, do they all have 15% affordable housing in them?
They're required to have 15 or 20%, depending on the...
The existing ones, though, may be sitting pre-existing from before any of the Mount Laurel decisions.
So all, like, Prowls Road and that go be grandfathered and have no affordable
Well,
housing in it?
it's not that they're grandfathered, you're right, it's grandfathered, but they basically...
You're not the only people that are going through this kind of...
And that also, that development...
That's supposed to make us feel better.
That development also waiting for obstacles in municipal government. That development was also forced down our throats by the courts.
Jim, how many units are in the senior housing buildings?
242 has 100.
The more recent one?
There's two of them right there.
I know this has
One's
56.
the county and one's the town.
This is 56, I'm not sure about this.
That's 100.
Yes, I know you had a question.
I just want to get a little bit of clarification about the 75. So
Could
as far
you
as,
speak a little louder?
just trying to get a little clarification about the 75 as a number. So the court orders 75 as a minimum, as a maximum? I know that it's coming
So
down from the
it's
144.
a two-pronged kind of number. So they said it's a maximum of 75 units, but you must get a certain number of COA units out of it. So based on the formula for COA units,
You need, okay, so you need 10 to
75.
15 units, and therefore you
Right.
need, because if he goes with rental, then
correct,
you have to have 75 in order to get that minimum 10, right?
correct.
Okay.
So 75 is not a real maximum.
Say it again?
75 is not a real maximum in the sense that the court obligates a certain number of affordable units. It doesn't obligate the ratio, it's a minimum
No,
ratio.
the borough has a,
borough.
yeah, the borough has a requirement for
Because that's what he's
affordable.
going to put.
Yeah, yeah.
I just have a question, if this goes through and at what point do we town meet our affordable housing
I'm
number?
sorry, I'm having trouble here.
If this goes through, do we meet all of our
If
affordable
this
housing
goes
number?
through, we're done.
So there's no more development that would require affordable housing?
No. Because of the borough's stand on supplying affordable housing for residents, any new building that goes up in the borough would have to have the 15 and the 20% set aside, so people of all means could live in town.
That's multifamily.
Yeah,
So
multifamily.
this particular development would fulfill our needs for the town?
For the first, this will finish our first round of affordable housing obligations. Yes. Okay. So the affordable housing issue is an issue that every municipality in the state faces. And we are at, right now, the end of our first round of affordable housing. The state will then address, going forward, how many units each municipality in the state of New Jersey is going to be required to have. So they may say, okay, Highland Park, in the next 10 years, we want you to have 25 new, I'm just throwing a number out, 25 new affordable family units and 65 new affordable one-bedrooms.
So does that require that we build proportionally new buildings?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay, here is my question. Can we take existing buildings in town and convert them to affordable
Already
housing?
done. All existing buildings in town have a certain number of affordable house units in.
So if I move out of town, can you take my house and convert it to affordable housing?
If you sell it to us. If a private person buys it, then it's a different situation. Yeah.
But infill development, redevelopment downtown could increase the density.
Absolutely. And anything that would go downtown. You've heard me talk a million times about our economic future is based on downtown development. So downtown, where there should be density, we can put more affordable units. So that's why one of our #1 goals is to complete some new downtown development.
So all the existing, like, garden apartments, do they all have 15% affordable housing in them?
They're required to have 15 or 20%, depending on the...
The existing ones, though, may be sitting pre-existing from before any of the Mount Laurel decisions.
So all like Prowls Road and that go to be grandfathered and have no affordable housing in it?
Yeah, it's not that they're grandfathered, you're right, it's grandfathered, but they basically...
So, in principle, we could have provided, some of those affordable housing. I know I'm bringing, but the density, from what I hear, is unprecedented almost, isn't it? It's like twice.
No, we have public housing.
I mean, I think we are creating here. 6th Avenue won't be able to maintain so much
So
traffic.
let me just clarify the one thing you said. The density is not unprecedented for the area. If you look at 6th Avenue, we have our affordable housing there, we have our senior housing there. The density is also based on the density that is from new developments in other places of town.
That's really not a fair comparison, I apologize, but the senior community doesn't have the same car traffic that would. The affordable housing that's on 6th Avenue, that's like 24 duplexes. It's not the same thing.
Okay, so the place where the driving studies are going to be recommended is at the planning board meeting, which, by the way, the planning board meeting is on Thursday night, and it is an open session. And I think, Jim, you're at the planning board, or Chris? Okay. So the role of the planning board is to advise the municipality on proper planning for different developments, etc. So it is possible, that the planning board is going to ask for a driving study, and that would have to be conducted.
At what point does this developer have to come up with a plan, since you had to do it first? Since you did all the pre-planning, what are the requirements?
We're under an obligation to put the zoning in place.
And he's under no obligation? No.
So once he comes up with a plan, there's no public discussion for that, it's just whatever he decides, as long as it fits within the parameters?
No, they would prepare a plan, file it with the municipality. Hopefully there would be interaction before then, where we could communicate concerns of the neighbors and try to protect it. You know, but in a strict legal sense, what the, I'm not an attorney, but what the requirements are is they just can file plans that conform to the zoning and it begins a review process. First for completeness, and then to the planning board, and in the process, both our office, the borough planner, and the borough engineer, and possibly some of the other boards and commissions might review the application, and there would be, at the very least, at the planning board, those neighbors within 200 feet of the site would receive legal notice letting you know that an application is coming in. I think what my recommendation to the borough would be, we try with the applicant is to, you know, try to have some degree of neighborhood meetings and interaction going in, but the law doesn't require that. We strongly suggest it.
So for instance, on most of the recent developments that we've had pop up all over town, we have had meetings, several meetings with the people who live in that area, with our planner, and we've invited the owners of the property to come hear what the neighbors are saying. And neighbors were able to give us input on the kinds of, us and the developer, input on the kind of style they want to see the houses or the apartments be, and that input allowed us to produce a redevelopment plan that we then give to the developer and say, this is what it has to accomplish.
But in this case, the developer is not under an obligation to do that. We had.
And I just wanted to add, your neighborhood is not the only neighborhood. We have American Properties on Cleveland Avenue. Right now, I live on Cleveland Avenue. I've lived there for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
We lost all the woods behind us first, the crossing. Now that we've got a clear cut and the one remaining tree, the one gorgeous, huge pin oak tree that was supposed to be saved, was now, all the roots have been severed on one side. So now we've been told that tree is coming down as well. We have counted, we're going to have 300 more cars going back and forth on Cleveland Avenue and North 2nd. And there's a school coming in at the end of the road.
Well, we don't know that.
I'm not
Pre-existed the original Mount Laurel court decisions.
And did you have more on your presentation?
We had a little bit more.
Do you want to let them finish and then we'll answer?
I did want to point out another issue, and we've been out to the site since the clearance. So when we talked about the retaining walls and what somebody might be proposing in development in a site plan, so they're going to have a proposed grading plan, and some approach, as we were showing, they may be they may have buildings in one location or another, but depending on what happens with grading in the area between the back of a home through that setback area down, where there are some existing trees, there are places where they've been completely lost. I think it's realistic to understand that there will probably be some further trees that they would propose removing because the grade conditions and the roots and the hydrology have changed. Some may fall, so you can't predict what that is, but I think it's fair to basically say, you know, it's likely to be further change from what's out there. I don't know in what way. So we've had it construct the ordinance to also look at replacement trees and trying to get as many as possible of them back on the site, and to also look at screening that can occur, I'll call it at eye level, close to the back property lines, where we're actually recommending to try to boost that provision in the ordinance up a bit more to get that immediate screening.
The building more than 30 feet, so they see a 30-foot setback and then about another 10 feet the building starts.
Right, we showed two different options. This one has the minimum setback requirement, the other one represents the minimum spacing between buildings. So The buildings will vary between those zones.
So maybe more, you're saying?
It can't be any
It
closer
can't be
than-
any less than 30 feet, but maybe more.
Correct. Yes.
So does the zoning overlay address issues of water movement? And, or is there a retention basin there? Is there any requirements of what the owner has to do?
So they're required to basically manage all of the additional stormwater that they're creating through any development on site. How they choose to do that,
So they're given their own, they can choose how to do it however they want. Isn't it approved by our engineers?
it's approved by our engineers. So there could be what we suspect, based on the coverage, the open space requirements that we put in, would be that some of the stormwater may be placed underneath parking areas or even underneath the street. They use these flat stormwater chambers under there. You see that more and more in urban redevelopment. Obviously, stormwater is flowing in this direction, so there may be some additional stormwater mitigation that they're doing in this area as well.
There's a major storm sewer that already runs down the center of that.
And just so you're clear on this, again, the plans would have to go before the planning board, and our engineer would have to analyze them and recommend to the planning board whether or not if they were sufficient in terms of stormwater management or any of the details like that any development goes through.
I have a question, a safety question. If, let's assume this gets built this way. Where does a fire truck enter? Where does an emergency vehicle enter and exit?
South 6th.
Just one place? And how wide is the street? Is it as wide as a city street?
It's probably similar to what you have right here on South 6th.
So it's only one way?
It's the same public street that fire trucks run on in the neighborhood.
So there's only one way in and one way out if there's a fire? Is that legal?
Is that safe? Maybe the argument of the developer is he wants to extend all the way onto Graham Street so he can have, access to exits on Graham Street. You know what I'm saying? In this way, you're restricting him to having only one entrance and exit point, which would be South 6th.
I mean, as a planner, I think reasonably, there is accessibility here, and it's not dissimilar from a lot of the street connections in other parts of town, so.
What does the yellow line represent that goes to Graham?
Pardon me?
The yellow line that runs to Graham.
That's a proposed trail, and we have provisions for walkways to continue across the site, which really tries to serve a public purpose of how people have walked there for generations. So let's just try to make sure we hit everybody who hasn't asked a question yet.
The point you were just making about South 6th Avenue, I live on the first block of South 6th Avenue, and that is not comparable to that. It is a one-way street, and theoretically, you only allow parking on one side of the street. In practice, the town has allowed the local church to park there pretty much whenever they see fit. So on a Sunday morning, there are two parking on both sides, and emergency vehicles can't get through. And should people need to exit this site, all these high-density buildings, and where they head down South 6th Avenue, they would run into a one-way street coming the other way. So that may be better addressed by the planning board or somebody else, but I would urge you in thinking about this, to think about this in terms of access to and from Raritan Avenue, because right now, that first block is heavily impacted by traffic coming off of Woodbridge Avenue as well as Raritan Avenue. And we have real problems in terms of people speeding up the street because they want to avoid all the traffic lights. We don't have any kind of speed bump. There are no stop signs on Magnolia from 8th down to 5th, so cars race down that way, which creates a hazard for pedestrians. So I urge you in thinking about this, I don't have any issues with this, you do whatever you do with it. But my issue is really the other end of the street, in that you may be creating a real choke point for people getting in and out, but also the quality of life on the first block may severely deteriorate.
That's a very good point, and I think you need to look at that.
Because the only way out is Mansfield, if they're not going to go over with themselves.
Yeah.
Mansfield is the only.
Yes, in the back, yes, it's 202.
Okay, I have a question about how this, I've looked at the ordinance, and I've read about the retaining walls, but I don't understand, and I'd like to know if something is being written into this ordinance that will provide for retaining walls that protect the existing properties on South 5th and South 7th, because that's a steep slope. He's already probably damaged, caused potential damage by taking out all those trees. And now, if it's not built in, he's not the most considerate of your neighbors, as we know. So you have to build that into the ordinance, and it wasn't clear to me that it was built into it when I read it. So
That's an issue that we're referring to the planning board and borough attorney to look at with regard to the ordinance.
Your ordinance has not been finalized.
Okay, but that will be part of the, that's what I'm asking. When it is finalized, will that be something that's going to be in there? Yes, possibly, but will it be in there?
The attorney.
Yeah, yeah, because it gets into a whole series of property ownership issues and relationships. I don't want to speculate, but we have flagged that already based on some things we've heard from neighbors to have our attorneys look at it.
So I guess my question is, can it be built into the ordinance?
If it can be, we have an opportunity at Thursday night's planning board meeting to try to make some reasonable amendments.
So it's possible that you might not be able to include that. It's possible that that protection might not be part of the ordinance.
Is it
We don't-
legal?
We don't,
Is it
first
possible?
question is,
Yeah.
we have to get an understanding about how far an ordinance can go with respect to that. There may be issues that are basic property rights issues that are a matter of law.
His property rights?
Your property rights as neighbors. I'm saying things that basically,
Okay.
I don't know, I don't want to speculate about what the law says. If you move earth here and that affects your neighbor's property, that's what I'm referring to.
Right.
Which would be the issue regardless of where you are, whether you're talking about a new ordinance, just anybody doing that.
Can you just make sure that we get to the attorney?
Yeah, we're gonna get with Roger.
We'll
and-
get to the attorney before Thursday's meeting.
I can't come on Thursday, so.
Somebody taking notes to be able to remember to include all these things.
I am. You don't know.
I appreciate that. I really feel like our attention is not protected us.
Susie's economic development liaison, she's got a pad and pencil.
We are recording it too.
And it's being recorded.
Thank you.
And I'll be up.
You guys got more?
Sorry, there was another last row, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, so the green buffer zone between the development and the residential units, at what stage and by whom is it determined what the height and density specs will be for that green buffer zone? Are there any existing regulations that would apply there?
That was one that,
We have a tree replacement ordinance.
you have a tree replacement ordinance. We don't know, as I indicated earlier, the degree to which, in some places, existing trees will have sufficient root structure and slope stabilization and non-affected hydrology, because the hydrology can affect whether or not those roots hold the tree in, could affect whether additional trees topple. So in some cases, we're calling to try to keep existing vegetation as one option. Enhance it with replacement vegetation for the trees that have gone down, replacement trees. And in other instances, we're also calling for, I should say another, on top of that, in this area, we're going to add some language with the planning board about enhancing the screening, I'll call it sort of an at eye level from backyards. We're, trying to apply it at a few different levels. There are different conditions that you can see now. In some cases, the trees are gone. behind some homes. So the approach there may be different than in a place where the trees are staying. And we won't know that until we're confronted ultimately with a site plan. But I think you may see some further changes in some trees over the next few months or years until we see that. Just because of the disturbance that's been out there, that's my best guess, is there's hydrology effect on those trees.
And to the issue of tree replacements, because of the borough's tree replacement ordinance, the developer has placed a bond with the municipality in excess of $200,000 for the replacement of trees. And it's based on the size of the trees, etc.
The trees got cut down under the guise of environmental testing. We know when that environmental testing will take place and when we will have the results from it.
The borough can act.
Last row, yes. That will come through.
You mentioned about screening. Is that only referring to trees, or these are multifamily units, or is there going to be some kind of like a fence barrier between this and the residential?
Could talk about a fence. We discussed this. And by the way, this is illustrating that in some cases there may be existing trees and replacement trees. In other cases, they may be lost and you may be dealing with new plantings along there. I think one of the concerns, and we certainly can take it under consideration and put in, that I would have is if we were to require a continuous fence, that's when everybody, I don't know what the projector's blinking.
A fence could be required under an ordinance?
It could be, but you're now talking about, I want you to just picture, let's just make it a white vinyl fence that's running this whole length. My concern would be if you're trying to do your best to deal with a challenging situation, I think you may end up, like literally highlighting the scar tissue around here with the fence. But if you really want a fence, you can put one in. I think it would make it much more harsh. From yards, you will see hundreds of feet of fence, and you're going to feel like there's a real wall between everything.
Can I speak to that? And I do have a question. If you want there to be any regeneration on that site ever, it needs to be fenced because of our deer population. You will not have an open space natural portion, and you will have very poor survival of any trees if they're that. So I just wanted to put that out there. But just can we have some perspective on, this seems like a very detailed zoning overlay to me. I'm not an expert by any means. So within your experience, I know we're trying to get the best we can of a hard lot, and we're trying to fence in a developer who has shown utter ruthlessness in terms of how he deals with the borough. But I'm concerned also about overreach, because what I want to say to my fellow townspeople is the worst environmental outcome and the worst private property outcome possible is that man leaves that site alone as an open pit for the next 5 years, which he can do. 2024, according to the LSRP, is when this process has to be done. So this is what we're dealing with. So just for some perspective, is this typical of a zoning overlay, or is this really, because I have never heard of specifying tree placement and stuff like that in a zoning overlay.
Yeah, many ordinances.
Okay. Yes. I mean, this is New Jersey, so
you have existing tree replacement. I should wanted to go back on one other point on the fence. Our feeling was that some of the neighbors have fences today, and that may be a better way to handle the fencing, is that people choose to have the fence or not. Our concern is...
I just read your reforestation plan for the southern plot, and it's a pipe dream if there's no fencing.
Okay.
You're walking across the street, though.
Yeah, I don't know how we have full control that.
This is a continuation on what you were saying, and my question is a continuation of that in terms of the overlay of this ordinance, and like what kind of teeth does it have? What what power does the town have with this ordinance? What can you impose, what can't you impose, and what is overreach?
You know,
So the power that the borough has is to set a law, which is basically what an ordinance says, that says on this piece of property, you can only build over here, it can only be a maximum of 75 units, and you have to replace the trees or whatever. You know, whatever we put in this ordinance is what a developer has to follow. Now, it's not telling him it has to be red brick or white brick or it has to have granite countertops or anything like that. But it does lay out what would be acceptable in terms of density, parking, because it is state mandated, you know, that we have a certain number of parking spots, and where we would like to place the development.
Okay, so I'm sorry to keep going, but the number of parking spots is based on the number of units, correct? So if he doesn't
and bedrooms.
And bedrooms. So if he, the developer, chooses not to max out at 75 and go smaller, the parking corresponds to that number, correct? So like it's not just...
The parking is based on the number of bedrooms, and again, how many cars per bedroom.
So, and then with the town specifying that you can only build this big, this wide, can't the town also say you can only go so high?
But still fit in, remember you have a limited space. So if you have to fit in 75 units.
But by minimizing the space that he can build up and saying, well, you can only build 75 units, but they can only be this high, wouldn't that force him to build less?
It'll make him go further on the property.
Yeah, but you also have in this that it has to be a certain percentage of permeable land, correct?
Correct.
But that can all be challenged.
The judge has ordered that 75 units get built.
So we could, yeah, maybe I can.
Wait, I'm sorry, because I think I'm not the only one who's confused by this. The judge ordered 75 or said 75 max?
The judge said 75 max, but you have to have X number of affordable units.
Right, that part I understand.
And so to get to the number of affordable units, you need 75.
But, okay, so then my other question is, then why are we trying to cram all of the affordable units in this 175? I mean...
Oh, no, let me explain. Every building...
I understand, okay. I completely understand the concept. I understand the concept of 75 units will allow for a certain number of affordable housing units that will meet the criteria that the town needs.
Not the town, that the town requires for that building.
Okay.
Each building, each developer is required to have a certain number of affordable units.
Right, but that is on a percentage base. It's not, if he chooses to build 50 units instead of 75, the number of affordable units goes down. So my point is, if the town has an affordable housing obligation that it has to meet, why are we making this particular unit to meet that requirement? If this unit doesn't meet the whole...
So it's not all, so it's, the requirement we have is being spread amongst many different buildings, new and old, in the municipality. So for instance, we have had a proposal from a developer for, I can't remember how many units on Raritan, Zappia. Do you remember? It's 16 units on Raritan, and of them there were
More than 15%.
Okay. So more than 15% of them are going to be affordables. That gets added to the number of affordables that we're going to be required to have on the other piece of property as well. And the other developments, this one on Walter and River going up, it's also required to have some. So each development has to fit that formula.
I get it, and the formula is applicable to everyone.
Correct.
I understand that, and I understand that it's spread around, and it is dependent on however many units are being built. I totally get that, that's not lost on me. What my concern is the population density, the traffic, the noise, and the impact on the property values and the quality of life for all of the homes that are on the perimeter of this development.
And I hear you. And when the planning board is going to be meeting, they need to hear you too. Right now, we're at the 75 units that the court has required for the COA litigation to come to an end, okay? And I'm happy to talk with you a little further about that. Because it's litigation, I can't really discuss too much about it until it's all done.
At what point can other people participate in this? I mean, this really has a very real effect on everyone in this room. And it's kind of treated like you're sort of powerless and you just have to wait and see what happens.
So it's not that, I don't want you to feel like you're the only group with this.
I don't feel like I'm the only group.
No, with this, with spot development, I call it spot development, like this throughout the municipality, when someone owns a piece of property, a lot of us feel helpless when it comes to the development of properties that are near their homes. I don't want you to feel like that nobody's listening, because I completely hear all of this. We've been fighting this in the courts since 2000, so though my house is not affected by this, my body and soul is.
No, and I understand that, and I think everyone appreciates that, but I think the disconnect here is the lack of transparency in that there are people for whom they had no idea that any of this was going on. That while there are public hearings, and I'm sure we're all thankful for the opportunity to speak our minds and be heard, from what I understand from my mother and her neighbors, a lot of them had no idea that this was happening. They had no idea that you've been fighting for 10 years. They had
20 years.
20 years. No idea. My mother, and not to make this about my mom, because I'm sure that everyone else here has similar experiences. But for her, because that's the only person that I'm here to speak on behalf of, this property was, in her mind, public property. Since she was a kid, she had no idea that this was private property.
Yeah.
These are woods that she played in as a child, that I played in as a child.
I think most people in town felt that way.
So to have this happen, where this completely careless developer came and just ripped out all of the trees in their backyard, and there's a giant gaping crater, and no one knows why, so it's jarring.
Yeah, of course it is. It's jarring to all of us. When I came to a meeting here that night, and it was Marion. She was here a minute. Marion came running in. The trees are gone. The trees are gone. I couldn't believe it, because I had heard 15 minutes earlier from the attorney that the judge ruled they could come down.
Well, this is exactly what he said he would do last May, though. He couldn't have been, I'm sorry, I can't let that go, because this is exactly what he said he was going to do last May.
How did he?
That is exactly what that tree removal map that I looked at in May of 2018 said. So
However,
none of us were that surprised.
What I was
we were
surprised
following.
about was how quickly.
Okay, yeah, that it happened.
Before
But
we want.
Okay. All right.
I
but it
can't
was gonna
really.
but it was going to happen.
I'm happy to discuss this afterwards.
Well, one thing, if I may, since we are, and I like what you say, but we put a lot of money, Martha and I, and
other neighbors too.
But if anything, we should learn that you cannot deal with this guy as you dealt now. So first, I would say fire your engineers, right? All your experts failed us, okay? I would say even the litigation failed us. So why would we have any trust, and I like the plan, that he's not gonna play with us. He's not. He's gonna go to court again, bring us. What is the result of the borough and the court? Those of you that were not, we were in court, and I understand exactly. The judge didn't care at all. The judge, I think, worked for the developer, and I'll be on YouTube for that. But certainly, he was not interested in anything. But we needed the result. It cannot be that we at the borough are victims. We pay taxes. We came here. And now some court and developer everywhere is determining the quality of this town. People will start leaving, because it's not what we came from. No, I know you are. I'm not slowing it. I was in court. I know exactly what you were against. Unfortunately, I had to invest a lot of money to see this show and believe you. But I know exactly what you are. But no, this is no joke. I mean, we paid for a lawyer for 5 hours, so the judge telling him you cannot talk. I mean, I don't know where we are, okay? I thought we have justice here. How are we going to fight it again? I don't care what but we cannot go again and again and again. Either we get better lawyer, better expert. We cannot let this guy run our life.
So I think.
No, I'm not against Gail. Yeah, I'm with you.
I know.
I'm totally with you on this.
It does seem that approving this zoning overlay, but making it as strategic as possible, because it's our next gambit. But we have to have that gambit. We have to have it done by May 31st, or we're in trouble for the.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
But I
let's make
think,
sure
I mean,
that we
I
get the best
appreciate
plan.
this good work, and we have to think of like a chess game, because JSM is not gonna accept this.
No, that's what I'm saying.
So he's not gonna accept it, but what portions of it can we get some judicial buy-in from to say, yes, this is a reasonable thing that a municipality, setbacks, impervious surface, safety, those are all things that I don't think, even though he owns the judge, I think there's a limit to what Jack Morris can get. So I think that our professional planners are helping us come up with that scheme. And so this is just a kind of visualization exercise. It's not the actual plan. So that's what I appreciate you're trying to do, is box something in that will have some teeth.
Thank you, Maria. So I think we should take a couple more questions and then wrap up this presentation and say goodbye.
I'd like to say something. At the school in the morning, there's bumper by bumper cars.
Right.
When the school starts, and when you pick up the people, so.
Right.
So.
On Fifth. Yeah.
So we gotta think about that traffic too.
Yeah.
Here, I know you've been waiting patiently.
So I've heard a lot about high-density housing, but nothing about the bedroom density. How many people are you envisioning in your scheme here are actually going to be living here?
Well, we can't limit the number of bedrooms for market rate. Basically, the ones that are not affordable.
Oh, but you've limited the square footage, so you can have some estimate about it.
So, in the ordinance, we have a maximum of 70% FAR. It's a little complicated to explain, but basically, this allows for X amount of square feet. So, what this does permit is what we feel is a reasonable balance of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, including some 3 bedroom units that have 2 floors, which the developer one has. So we're trying to accommodate that to a certain extent.
Okay.
So what number,
balance of
she's
1, 2,
asking the population that could live in.
How many people do you envisage in whatever your scheme here? A range even is fine.
In terms of people, I won't be able to answer that. In terms of bedrooms, it's around 150.
So
possibly.
But that's not a fine number. It'd be more.
I did a demographic study of all the developments. I'm on the board of education. So we were looking at that student population, and we paid for a study from someone from Rutgers, which turned out to start being very inaccurate. So our finance committee did a study of the actual numbers as they started coming in, and we determined pretty much that like 75 units with kind of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, you're looking at an average of like just under 4 people per 250 to 300 is the kind of extrapolated number that you get from, we did all 5, Pulte and, you know, all of the new Merriwold, and that's the kinds of numbers you get. It's pretty obvious too, by the way. That's why we redid the study, because the study that we got was so far off.
So Highland Park tends to be an anomaly from the rest of, from a lot of other municipalities in terms of number of people in apartments.
Higher number.
Higher number.
Yes.
So more schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we touched on flooding a little bit, but I'm just a little concerned because I've been in Highland Park a long time, and I know flooding is a big issue, especially at least once every 5 years we get catastrophic floods, where the entire meadow park is underwater. And so that ravine, I mean, it's a ravine, and that's where the water is flowing down from the entire south side, South 7th and South 5th. Water has to go somewhere. I'm a little concerned, like, who's going to be doing the flooding study? Is it their guy? Is it our guy? Is our guy qualified? Because, and is he going to take into account not just flooding, but the catastrophic flooding, which is not once every 100 years, it's once every 5 years.
Yeah, so they're going to have to, as I said before, retain any stormwater runoff that they create on this site. That's in addition to what flows today.
That's not the same thing as the 100-year storm.
The 100-year storm.
Which is why it's very smart to have parking on the ground floor, if you ask me.
Right.
Because it's gonna flood.
So, has there ever been flooding down this section here? So,
absolutely.
So go back to what we said originally.
The entire park is, the entire park, the Donaldson Park is underwater.
Now we've only been on board helping the borough for the past 2 years, so we don't have all the history, so understand that. So one of the reasons we were trying to push, I said in the very beginning, you know, I used the term environmentally sensitive. Pushing development uphill versus down there is something that's talked about in the master plan. And so to the degree that we saw proposals that had development all the way to the very end of the site, this is attempting to better address that.
Most of the retaining walls, are they going to affect our flooding issues?
And to the degree that the retaining wall is downslope from your property, it shouldn't because water is going down.
But will the retaining wall act as a dam?
Soil. No, it's holding up soil on your side. Go back to the section. So for instance,
the flooding near the meadows has nothing to do with that. It's, the meadows are what's called floodplains, so it comes from the river dam. So
But this, I don't know if it goes into Morris's property. But the
it's
floodplain
not
doesn't
going to go much. I mean, it is a concern if it was, because it won't be able to insure this property. I mean, insurance, you know, companies look at that. Unfortunately, for us, I don't think that's the case. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do it.
So,
I mean, you should have what you say then.
Right. So, where you live on South 7th, if there's retaining wall, the water from your property will be flowing as it does today, and then dropping. And some, when they're in the drop zone, they're going to have to control that. They can't allow it to hit a velocity in the road. It would actually affect their own property. So there's a design element that they'll have to take into account with all of that. But it's below you. water is running down into the property, so you shouldn't have any upstream effect on your property because water is flowing downstream.
Not important compared to all the flooding, but I would just, is it possible for you guys to add, because I think that plan, the written plan that I read, is long, if you can add, I saw trees were native trees, but I didn't see anything about shrubs except shrubs. I would like you to add native shrubs, preponderance of native shrubs, and, because we know, staff knows what deer eat, what they don't eat, what's native, what's invasive. So we're going to have a say in this, but please add the word native for the preponderance of native shrubs.
So I think we can certainly stay after we've been here an hour and a half. We can take other questions about
Did you show your last slide?
Yeah.
Your last slide.
Well, we had a few more where there were some provisions in the ordinance. And by the way, one of the issues was to keep retaining walls a certain distance from your property line, so it's not right up to your line. And by the way, we saw plans that would have had retaining walls behind everyone's homes. So
I think
you may be concerned about this. There were things that were of much greater concern and broader impact.
And the idea is to keep the open space as naturalistic as possible. So we have a provision that states that retaining walls could be provided in that area to prevent it from stabilizing the soil, which affects the neighboring properties. So that would be a determination of the borough engineer. But as we discussed earlier, that's something we can check with the attorney and engineer if that's viable.
Can I just add one quick one? You know, in this plan, okay, but the zoning should be that if that accepted, that the southern part will be owned or controlled by the borough. So in 10 years, he won't come back and ask for variance to. So maybe.
Oh, you mean back to?
Yeah, maybe there should be a plan
Easement,
for.
can there be an easement on it?
Yeah, he can come.
There's an open space provision and states that it may be dedicated to the borough. If not, then at least it needs to be used as.
So maybe think about that as I don't know, a park or whatever, eco park, but something that he won't have any access to this once he completed this plan. This guy is gonna come again, there's no question about that. No, I mean,
Yeah.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you very much
thank
for
you
coming.
all.
Appreciate your concern.